Hello, hello, hello. This is Ronald Allen with Managing Change Through Effective Communications. Tonight's discussion, are you ready to self-actualize? So where on earth is this one coming from? Are you ready to self-actualize? We all go off to work believing that we have some modicum of control. I'll use that term, right? We have children. We get engaged into relationships. We come from a social background that has been taught to us, given to us, presented, and in some cases sold to us, that we feel we have the mojo on life. And yet, somewhere between self-believing, selling ourselves the propaganda, and a good dose of real reality, life coming back at us, we find out that things are not exactly what we thought. And yet, we then perpetuate this idealized self. Good afternoon, Tracy. Thanks for checking in. Idealized self by competing in a realm that doesn't serve our purpose. So tonight, I wanted to share with you a very different perspective. In fact, it was because a young lady on Facebook had sent me pictures of her dog. We talk from time to time about the weather, and we had even mentioned certain music, right? And I'm going to give you a silly kind of a proposition here. Is it possible, and this is presented by Andy Warhol, is it possible to have a perfect love, one that lasts forever? Bear with me, I'm going to show you the connection. The Beatles came out with All We Need Is Love. And for those romantic aficionados, if that's such a word, Walter Jackson talks about if it's magic. Now, you could say it's about loving another person. Other people from a different ilk, from a different thought process, would say it's about loving ourselves. And people like Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, certainly Mother Teresa, would say it's about loving mankind, the human species. So, what on earth has that got to do with are you ready to self-actualize? What is really interesting in a very hard core environment called project management, they expect us to engage stakeholders, other people, identify their needs, preferences, focal points, and even their, shall we say, Achilles heel, for the benefit of a project. Yet when it comes time for you, the individual, to self-actualize and say, what is it that I need to be productive so that I can give unflinchingly, I can give in a way that says, I don't want anything, don't expect anything in return. So we're very good at saying, love this entity called corporations, love this environment that I've sold myself to, I have acclimated myself to, called a job environment. And yet there's very little reciprocating from those entities. For those of you who feel that I'm not quite on point, did you know that globally we are all at-will employees? Did you know that the international courts allow international corporations, multi-conglomerates, to have sovereign rights over the people of the country that they are residing in? Did you know and realize that you see the salaries have been pushed down, the middle class has been squeezed out? So what's left? If in project management we're told that we have to use all these processes and knowledge areas to gain a favorable outcome, why can't we use the same mindset and look at this area called self-actualization to better get in tune with ourselves? Now, I know a lot of people out there talk about motivation, and other people talk about why your life was so miserable. What are you going to do about it? Well, here are a few reflections, and I'm going to give you then the academic side, which is coming out of a Dr. Kurt Goldstein. He's a neurolinguistic and psychiatrist in holistic theory. Holistic theory. So what is holistic theory? The premise behind this is organismic theorist. Organismic theorist. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. In psychology, in the area of psychology with families. Okay? So it's the dynamics, and we've spoken about this before. We are introduced, our social inclinations come primarily from our families, then from our theological focus, and then certainly from education, or the environments we're pushed into, and then of course into how we deal with society at large. Shabanam, thank you very much for checking in. Shabanam, pretty cool name. So when we talk about are you ready to self-actualize, we're looking at the neurolinguistic and psychiatric principles of how we as individuals seek out compatible, supportive environments. And in the psychology of family, of holistic sociology, theories stress organizational unit, organizational integration of human beings expressed through their individual ability to grow and develop. So now, I hope I've kind of come full circle, and that is, we're very good at selling ourselves on the external entities, being corporations, a job, society's acceptance of us. All you have to do is look around the world, and you see most nationalities, most cultures have a untouchable group of people, and those that, well, they can come and go like raw material. So at a time like this, where there is a massive shift and there is a rise of hostility towards those that are not as accepted, perhaps the one area we can shore up for ourselves is our own self-efficacy, our own individual identity. And I'm not going to shout and rant and rave and say to you, well, you've got to be this way, or you've got to be another way, or you have to follow a certain trait. What I am going to share with you tonight are a number of points that, upon reflection, will begin to allow you to identify what is important to you, for you, so that when you come into the marketplace, when you come into the work environment, when you come into the so-called real world, you have, as we say, crocodile skin and buffalo hide, right? So let's take a look. Are you ready to self-actualize? So we said, and these are three individuals who profess that they seek their holy grail, if you want. Andy Warhol said, is it possible to have a perfect love? The Beatles wrote, all you need is love. And one of my favorites, Walter Jackson, if it's magic. Now, let's take those perspectives, those phrases, and see how they relate to us as individuals. So when we do move out in the real world, we have some self-value, and that we can not necessarily react, but rather observe the lack of humanity in others, in their behavior, perhaps insecurity, perhaps a lack of intelligence, not the academic, just the realization of how we are all truly connected. And in a moment, our life is over, and that's the game. Now, I don't know about you. I'm not sure about, resurrection and coming, the second coming. I just haven't met anybody yet who's done that. So let's start off. So I have one here. Wisdom is the relinquishment of judgment. Henry Kissinger, back in the 60s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, actually 60s and 70s, who was brought on board by Nixon on the administration, did a lot of foreign policy implementation, negotiations, land, rights, ability for American corporations to operate, for negotiations of trade, raw material, resources, labor. Fast forward 30 years, he said, if he knew then what he knew now. So think about that a minute. The last time you chastised somebody, the last time you thought you were right, adamantly right, were you? Were you for the moment? I use the phrase, I don't control, I manage. Control is absolute. Manage is a flux. That is life. Do you need to have judgment as often as you express? Have you reflected over the years and found that could have done a little different, could have gone a different way? Didn't have to be so anvil, hammer over the head mentality. Micromanage, for those of you who are supervisors, managers. Could you embrace the other person's culture a little bit more? Culture in the sense of how they do things, not necessarily another nationality. The culture of how they do things. The wisdom is in the relinquishment of judgment. That's a very powerful one. Judgment and peace cannot coexist. Judgment and peace cannot coexist. At first hand, yeah, makes sense, no problem. So let me ask you a question. Do you ever lie to yourself? Sure you do, all the time. The conundrum is you're told one thing, you behave a second way, and then life comes at you from the sidelines. And yet you continue to believe in constructs and behaviors and social etiquette that do not support the desired outcomes that you're looking for. That's what I mean by that phrase where judgment and peace cannot coexist. We need to look at ourselves first. It's not about saying, well, I know all this stuff and I now want to impress and push it upon others. That's called the Spanish Inquisition. More importantly, it is to better self-manage ourselves as we go through life, as we go through situations, as we deal in relationships, as we negotiate at work. It is to better manage ourselves because the meaning of the experience is up here, not anywhere else. Question everything that you hold dear. Now that's interesting. Question everything that you hold dear, not just what you're told. Because you see, the anchors you have in life are over time, right? These beliefs, these concepts, why things should be a certain way, why things should not be a certain way, who is on top, who's on first, second, third, to coin an American phrase. As we've seen now, everything we thought was right is not necessarily so. Everything we thought was wrong has changed. I'm not saying it's right, I'm simply saying it's changed. So the mental challenge is, how do we construct our realities going forward? So our children, let's make it real. Let's make it real. Our children today are so much more aggressive in information, in how they want to do things, how they question us as parents, how do we mentally address that? There are some very specific ways. And one is a very simple way. You bring them into the decision-making process. Let me give you an example. Finance. You got $1. You want to spend 90 cents on the game, or you want to spend 10 cents and keep 90 cents so we can get through the next week. Basic spending protocol. Let them understand that this is what we have to spend for a certain period of time. You've now endeared them to the process. You've asked for their input. Now they have to use brain matter to make a decision. Accountability, responsibility. The question of authority is the question of authorship. Now everybody wants to be the captain, right? I'm sure in your companies, you got a lot of people who think they're the captains, they're the chiefs. When you lay down an argument, when you present a process to address an issue, you are now the author of that process. The outcome, which is on you. The responsibility, the pros and cons, the success, the failure is on you. It's how we address those challenges before we make them. Right? So when we're negotiating at work, are we in tune, are we in tune with our company's strategy and objectives? Or are we just looking for our own benefit? And if we are looking for the corporate strategy, have we endeared those people that are 1 or 2 steps above us to get their input so that we can move forward in a mutually beneficial manner? Or are we the old narcissistic, self-righteous, me, and guess what? You don't get a favorable outcome, and if you do, nobody wants to work with you again. So your longevity is cut very short. Let's take a look at some others. Knowing is certainty. Well, that's a real brain bender right there. Knowing is certainty. The outcome dictates the certainty. The knowing of an approach must be tested. Example, going on a holiday. Let's take I-95 down south. No, we want to take the more back road county route. Major accident on I-95 because someone decides that they want to get up really late and piss us all off by weaving in and out of the cars. So, it is the outcome of your experience that gives you certainty to move forward. And it is the thinking, the analytical thinking that we all go through, guys. We all go through this. That says, this is my approach to addressing this challenge, this need, this requirement, this process, this trip. So, knowing is certainty based on the outcome. And therein lies the ability, the challenge. Example, anyone who's had children, you are constantly in fear. The certainty is that you will deal with it. The knowing is what you do on a daily basis in order to get through the day, in order to get your activities and chores and responsibilities done so that everybody comes home in one piece. That's pretty much the ultimate, right? When you're raising kids, let's face it. Here's another one. I'm going to finish up here because my dinner is calling. How can they reject you? They don't know you. How can they reject you? Easily. You allow them to. You do not feel you're worthy. That's a very strong emotional need. You don't feel that you have the credentials. I've gone through that many a time, and even to this day, as I morph into another profession, morph into another field of interest, I'm constantly asking myself, do I have the ability? You only lack the ability if you don't prepare yourself. You only lack the, I'm thinking of the word, but it's not coming to my head, the assuredness if you don't do some research. We can all do research. We have so much access to data. The process, the method is as old school as studying itself. What's your thesis? What's your research? What is it based on? What's your argument? So we don't have to all have PhDs, because guess what? Those who have ventured into business